When we are laid to rest, it's often presumed that this will be an occasion in which we are surrounded by loved ones. In many ways, the closing acts of our lives are when we are most connected to the living. People find more time for you, and they focus on making that time well spent. It is presumed that we live in a world of our peers. We are familiar to few and known by many. If you were to go missing today, your world would take notice. You could not simply just disappear. This is what is presumed, and while this might be the truth for me and for you, it is not always the case, for more than 1 million people have found their final resting place on Hart Island in the northeastern Bronx of New York City. Hart Island is the home of the lost souls, a common place for the people who died completely alone. Not in the sense of company on their departure, but for people who throughout their lives had become detached from society. The purpose of Hart Island is to bury the bodies of people unclaimed by families, people without connection, the truly alone. I am Steinet, and welcome to the Island of the Lost Souls. Much in contrast to what it is now, with it being described as the loneliest place in New York. In the early 19th century, Hart Island would draw crowds in the thousands to see bare-knuckle boxing bouts, before becoming the home for the training of the 31st Infantry Regiment of the United States Colored Troops in 1864. The island could be populated by 2,000 to 3,000 at any time, and would be responsible for the training of 50,000 men by the time its purpose as a training camp had been fulfilled. This would be before the site would undergo construction to become a prisoner of war camp during the American Civil War. The island would be home to 3,413 Confederate soldiers. 235 of these would die while in the camp, but would be buried in Cypress Hill Cemetery in the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens, instead of on the island. The island was purchased by New York City in 1868 for $75,000. Shortly after this acquisition, a 45-acre public graveyard was built. A 24-year-old woman named Louisa Van Slyke, an orphan who had fell victim to yellow fever, is rumoured to be the first to be buried here. The cemetery would soon to become known as the City Cemetery or Potter's Field. The island became a melting pot of different purposes. It had a women's psychiatric hospital called Pavilion and a school, and in the late 19th century, a boys' workhouse was built as an extension to the prison on Blackwell's Island, which is today known as Roosevelt Island. Soon the island was populated by 500 delinquent boys within the workhouse, as well as elderly male prisoners. It would seem the elderly had come here to look out their window upon what would be their final resting place, the Potter's Field. During World War II, the delinquent population of Hart Island, along with its prisoners, was moved to Rikers Island, while Hart Island would be used as a disciplinary barracks for the United States Armed Forces. The island continued to have a varied and transitional history, repurposed many times for many different uses. It would open back up as a prison when the New York City Department of Correction required it, but the facilities were deemed inadequate, so this came to an end. In 1950, the New York City Board of Estimate approved the construction of a homeless shelter, which could house up to 2,000 of the city's most underprivileged inhabitants. It opened from 1951 to 1954, before the residents of City Island, another member of the Pelham Islands archipelago, opposed its existence, taking issue with the homeless shelter and its inhabitants. When the homeless shelter closed, the Department of Correction took control of the island again, reopening the prison. They decided to include the creation of an alcoholism treatment centre in 1955 and a courthouse that specifically ruled on cases which involved the homeless. Anywhere between 1,200 to 1,800 prisoners would find themselves residents on Hart Island. In 1959, a plan was approved to build a new $7 million workhouse on Hart Island, replacing the one that existed before. It even got its own baseball field, built for the prisoners, named Cratter's Field. This was after Marvin Cratter, a businessman who donated 2,200 seats from the demolished Ebbets Field Stadium. The island was utilised as a prison until 1966, when its reign would finally come to an end due to the changes in the penal code. The final purpose of Hart Island to the living would come around when a drug rehabilitation centre was proposed for the island. The centre would be known as Phoenix House, which opened in 1967. Today, Phoenix House is a non-profit drug and alcohol rehabilitation organisation which operates in 10 states with 150 programmes. While during its humble beginnings, Phoenix House was home to 350 residents and a vegetable garden. It hosted festivals that could draw up to 10,000 people. During the closing act of Hart Island's life, ironically, it was not alone. Phoenix House would publish a newsletter named The Heartbeat, and it organised baseball games, alive for now, but not for long. In 1977, the ferry service to Hart Island ended. Phoenix House moved to a building in Manhattan. The life on Hart Island had ended. Originally, only the southern tip of the island was home to a graveyard. The city cemetery, or the Potter's Field, was 45 acres. The other 2/3 of the island were habitable. This would all soon start to change. In 1985, the island, now abandoned, would be used to bury 16 bodies of people who had died from AIDS in deep graves on a remote section of the southern tip. This was due to the belief at the time that the remains could still be contagious. Quickly after this, thousands of AIDS victims would be buried here on Hart Island. This is when the graveyard would become utilised for its main purpose, a place of rest for the unidentified or unclaimed corpses of New York City. The bodies are loaded onto a ferry and entombed in plain wooden coffins into trenches, side by side and on top of each other. Justin von Bujos, the cemetery's chaplain, said of Hart Island, "Hart Island is like a shadow of New York City. It reflects the lives of people who live on the margins, the homeless, the sickly, the neglected, the forgotten, and overworked. No one lives their lives believing it will end here." The term Potter's Field is a biblical reference. It stems from the story of a clay-heavy piece of land near Jerusalem, bought with 40 pieces of silver. It was returned by remorseful Judas. Worthless for farming, the island would be used to bury strangers. The Potter's Field on Hart Island today is home to 1 million remains of those who the world had deemed as strangers. It seems these people who died alone will forever stay in this eternal solitude. Today the only access to Hart Island is by ferryboat, and the island is restricted under the jurisdiction of the New York City Department of Correction. Family members who wish to visit the island must request a visit ahead of time with the Department of Correction. The island, by all definitions, is a ghost town. The island, the loneliest place in New York, has now found a second wind, a place for people to give attention to the lost souls of the island. The Hart Island Project is an interactive online project that in 2018 mapped the entire island using a drone and embedded the website with 68,000 profiles of people who had been buried on the island. The goal of the website is to preserve the histories of those buried for present and future generations. One of the most important factors of this project is that in 2019, the Department of Correction has finally lost jurisdiction over Hart Island. The ownership has been signed over to the New York City Parks and Recreation, ending 150 years of penal control. This is the perfect transition of the island from being a penitentiary for the forgotten to what it should be, a graveyard for commemoration and mourning, a place for people to be remembered. The lost souls of Hart Island have finally returned to purpose the living.